Hello, sophisticated St. Louis. Today I'm going to be interviewing Ted Kornblum, who is the owner of Magnatone. It's a company that has been around since the 30s, went out of business at some point, and Ted brought it back. They manufacture amplifiers for the music industry and is doing amazing things with the professional music scene. And you're going to find out some things that you never knew about Magnatone and this great brand that has been resurrected right in St. Louis. So I've been fascinated with brands that at one point were very hot, kind of disappeared, and then were brought back by people who are really passionate about the brand and restoring something great. And I think that's the story of Magnatone.
I feel like it was a unique brand that was lost. And what intrigued me about Magnatone was that it was a boutique and high-end brand back in the day, and it hadn't been screwed up because they focused on high fidelity stereo effects, and there were no outsourcing of parts from America. It was truly a 100% American-made brand. And it is still to this day, other than a few parts. Making things with the handmade quality, attention to detail, knowing where the parts come from are all important, I think, in making a high-quality product that will last.
And how did that attract you to the brand? Meaning, do you come from a music background?
I come from St. Louis, Missouri. I was born here. My family had a company called St. Louis Music Supply, and my grandfather, Bernard Kornblum, started that company in 1922. And then my father, Gene Kornblum, got into the business and really catapulted it and grew it after he got out of college. And he named a brand Crate for Crate amplifiers, and my grandfather named Alvarez for Alvarez guitars. My dad bought the brand Ampeg when it was out of business completely, and he grew the company in St. Louis for probably 85 years. And I felt that that was a pride that I had and have about St. Louis, making things with the people in the city in which you came from, and there's a great work ethic here, a lot of great talented musicians and engineers here in St. Louis. Well, when I was in high school, I wanted to bring the equipment that my family's company made, and so I would bring the guitars to sound check at concerts down at the arena or the Keel, and I would be the young kid at 16 years old bringing equipment to these bands. Magnatone had the luxury of having some really famous ones in the history of rock and roll. Dwayne Eddy, to Eddie Cochran,
there ain't no cure for the summertime blues,
to Buddy Holly,
all of my love, all of my kissing, you don't know what you've been missing, oh boy.
Grady Martin in Nashville.
Out in the West Texas town of El Paso, I fell in love with a Mexican girl.
What was interesting is that when I brought the Magnatone brand back, I wanted to make it better, frankly, than it was, because it was a great amp for stereo effect. And yeah, it's truly the inventor of pitch shifting vibrato using a non-moving part. But people use that effect for a part of a song. They really play the guitar amp, and that's really how they get their sound. So the first two people that I mentioned that I owned the name Magnatone were Billy Gibbons from ZZ Top.
Ted Kornblum picked it up, and he came to me with the announcement that he had acquired Magnatone, and I said, well, there's only one thing to do: resurrect it and take it forward. And to do so, you've got to do it right. And that one word, doing it right, that phrase covers a lot of ground, but they have done it from top to bottom. It's, when I use that word robust, more like ferocious would be a good way to describe it.
And Neil Young. And both of them had played Magnatone, but when I went to each of them, I asked them what they'd like in the new amp, and they both had complete opposite requests. And Neil Young, he wanted it to have the vibrato with stereo, and then Billy Gibbons wanted the complete opposite pretty much, and he wanted it to have a master volume to feel the gain. And he wanted it to have an effects loop, and he wanted it to look a little bit more modern. You could call it retro-futuristic.
I was impressed when I walked through, where the amps are made, that, I saw tubes, and I was like, wow, tubes. But I thought, how cool, it still exists. Why did you keep it that way versus changing it to be more solid state?
The musical instrument industry is somewhat fickle, and there's a dividing line between modern technology, innovation, and tradition. The market that Magnatone has been known for and is known for is always, you could say, vintage, and it has to be done in such a way that preserves that legacy, because making changes to things that are hallmarks, are cornerstone type sounds, brings questions sometimes to people's minds as to what the brand stands for. So we chose tubes because that is a sonic difference that you can hear and feel, and you can replicate it with technology. And it's not to say that Magnatone wouldn't embrace technology at some point, but I think that our core function is to provide cornerstone sounds which are based in tube manufacturing. And what we have here are the famous Magnatone varistors used for our patented pitch shifting vibrato effect.
So you can hear
You need 4 of them to be stereo, and then these need a tube to power them. The story about how Magnatone amps are made is important to the consumer, and that makes the brand more personal to them, because we're made in our own factory, and we are not owned by a conglomerate. So the attraction to working at Magnatone in St. Louis, I believe, is that they're able to see something physically be built with their own hands. They really believe that the product is unique because of its place in history. This is you could say, a story of resurrection, bringing back to life something that had value. And so for them to be cutting wire with their hands, then inserting it into the different parts of the chassis is gratifying, because not only are they able to see, they're also able to hear. And then turning on the television or going to a concert, they're able to see the people playing it. And I think that's really gratifying.
You start to lose sight of what it is you're looking for when you've only got a certain amount of things to work with. And I really stopped looking at a lot of the new amp manufacturers. I'm aware of them, but they all sort of still sound the same to me. So the Magnatone thing was like, oh wow, you can make an amp that sounds really good. That doesn't sound like everything else.
An intimacy that comes from being a small brand that is, you could say, even an underdog, because not only are we proving ourselves to be better, and that to me is a very big challenge to keep always in mind, which is to continuously improve. I really feel humble to our consumer or our retailers for investing in Magnatone, because they have a lot of choices. We make these with the TLC and care and detail that goes into all the different components, and it's not a matter of the most expensive components, it's the best sounding components. The story about why Magnatone is here is important, but the proof is in the performance, and the amps stand up and they last, and they will last forever if they're made correctly.
All right, I think it's a wrap. I guess it's a wild world out there of new things happening all the time, but, you know, I love all this vintage stuff.